nation will endure as it has endured.
Our long national nightmare is over.
Give me a break. That's a bunch of malarkey.
Welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barrett.
And I'm Chaz Licciardello.
President Biden gets to work as hopes for a Trump conviction in the Senate fade.
Threat of domestic terrorism hasn't faded though. We're going to be looking at that, plus America's deadly drone program.
All of that, plus the history of third parties and Joe Biden's ritzy watch.
Good to see stupid stuff making the news again, John. Let's get into it.
It's been a busy full first week in the White House for President Joe Biden, issuing a raft of new executive orders on everything from climate change and scrapping the ban on transgender people serving in the military to ending contracts on some privately owned prisons, although he's still weighing whether to also ban private contracts for things like immigration detention. Meanwhile, one of President Biden's first orders, blocking deportation for 100 days for illegal immigrants, has been put on hold for at least 2 weeks by a federal court judge in Texas this week. A stark reminder that while Congress has limited powers to block these executive actions, the third branch of government, the courts, does have a big say in things too. President Biden has also been spending a lot of time working the phones this week, taking and making calls to world leaders, including Russia's Vladimir Putin.
In his first official phone call with Vladimir Putin since becoming president, Joe Biden taking a tough new tone with the Russian leader, delivering this stern warning.
That the United States will act firmly in defense of our national interests in response to malign actions by Russia.
And among the malign actions Biden raised, Russian interference in the US election, Russian hacking of US federal government agencies as a part of that massive solar wind cyber attack late last year, Russian bounties on US soldiers in Afghanistan, ongoing Russian aggression towards Ukraine, and the poisoning and persecution of Putin's political rival, Alexei Navalny. The two did seem to agree in principle, though, on a 5-year extension of the New START nuclear arms limitation treaty, although the Kremlin then jumped the gun, announcing it was a done deal.
Presidents expressed satisfaction on reaching an agreement on the extension of the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. In the coming days, all the necessary procedures will be completed to ensure the further functioning of this important international legal mechanism for the mutual limitation of nuclear missile arsenals.
Hang on, don't forget what Biden and Putin talk most about.
What was that?
Fox News' Pete Ducey.
Mr. President, what's your talk to Vladimir Putin about?
You.
Huge news, if true, but it's not a massive surprise because remember last year we found out that Pete Ducey was Biden's real vice presidential pick.
President, have you picked a running mate yet?
Yeah, I have.
You have? Who is it?
Who is it?
You.
Those two have a very strange relationship,
That's a way of
John.
saying Fox News, I'm not talking to you. Also this week, Dr. Janet Yellen was sworn in as the new US Treasury Secretary. The former chair of the Federal Reserve is the first woman to serve in either role, let alone both roles, and she took the socially distant oath from the first woman to serve as Vice President, Kamala Harris.
So help me God. Congratulations, Madam Secretary. Congratulations, Vice President. Thank you so much.
Dr. Yellen was confirmed with a strong bipartisan majority, 84 to 15. Her first order of business, working on the detail of President Biden's $1.9 trillion stimulus package, including a $1,400 individual payment, and then trying to shepherd it all through Congress, no small task. The Senate also confirmed America's new chief diplomat this week. Anthony Blinken is the new Secretary of State, replacing Mike Pompeo.
The yeas are 78, the nays are 22. The nomination is confirmed.
So again, strong bipartisan support, despite some Republican senators expressing concerns that Blinken, who served in senior positions in the Obama administration, might mark a return to what they termed America leading from behind. America's new Defense Secretary, meanwhile, retired General Lloyd Austin, also got straight to work at the Pentagon this week following his confirmation.
See you around campus.
General Austin makes history as the first black defence secretary ever. He needed a special congressional waiver to do it, though. Usually former soldiers have to be retired for a minimum 7 years from the military to appointed in this kind of a role, a safeguard to ensure civilian control of the armed forces. Finally, the former Deputy Director of the CIA, Avril Haines, has taken up the post of Director of National Intelligence, becoming America's first female spy-in-chief. But we can expect a bit more of a battle over the confirmation of Biden's choice for Attorney General, Merrick Garland. Garland, you'll recall, was nominated by President Obama in 2016 to fill the Supreme Court vacancy created by the death of conservative icon Antonin Scalia. Republicans refused to even conduct a confirmation hearing back then. They filled the seat in 2017 with Trump's conservative appointee Neil Gorsuch. Garland is likely to be confirmed ultimately for AG, but Republicans already threatening to dredge up a bunch of Hunter Biden stuff to see if Garland will push for further Justice Department investigations or just try and shut that thing down, Chaz.
Jeez, you hope they wouldn't block Garland. Otherwise, he'd be taking it pretty personally by now, I would have thought. He is a clever pick, though, because apart from the symbolism of his pick, obviously, he also spent the Clinton years investigating domestic terrorism. Seems useful. And the vacancy he would leave on the DC Appeals Court could be filled by a black female judge, which is important because Biden promised during the campaign he would appoint a black female judge to the Supreme Court, so he needs one to appoint.
Yeah, and he's probably only got until November next year to do it, if he's going to hold on to the Senate or not.
Exactly. By the way, you just talked about Senate confirmed positions.
Yeah.
As far as non-Senate confirmed positions go, there's about 4,000 of them in the government. They appointed 1,000 of them this week. They just staffed a quarter of Washington in 1 week. That's way ahead of previous presidents. They've really hit the ground running.
Yeah, and there's a bit of a purge going on. Some Trump appointees, who are political appointees, are trying to dig in and keep their old jobs, maybe because they've seen what other former Trump employees have had difficulty in getting new jobs in the wake of that administration. Now, we've got an update for you on
the second impeachment of Donald J. Trump. Oh, for f***'s sake.
And it looks increasingly likely that Donald Trump's second impeachment trial will turn out to be pretty much like the first, with only a small handful of Republicans even considering possible conviction, not nearly enough to reach the 2/3 majority required. A motion this week put forward by Republican Senator Rand Paul to challenge the very constitutionality of impeaching an ex-president was defeated by 55 to 45. But those 45 Republican votes have some Democrats saying this is all a big fat waste of time. Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia already now pushing the idea of a censure of Trump instead.
To do a trial knowing you'll get 55 votes at the max seems to me to be not the right prioritization of our time right now. Obviously, we do a trial, maybe we could do it fast, but my top priority is COVID relief.
Yeah, I can't see 17 Republicans agreeing to a censure either, to be honest. But I don't think we should assume, like Tim Kaine just did, that it's 55 votes max because of that resolution just then. Republican Senator Rob Portman said that when he voted for the resolution, he was simply wanting to hear the constitutional question be debated. He said he hasn't made his mind up yet about his actual views. He also said Mitch McConnell was in the same boat. So 17 votes might be vanishingly unlikely, but the precise result still in some doubt. On the question of whether you can hold a Senate trial for an ex-president, 170 legal scholars from across the ideological spectrum have signed a letter arguing that such a trial is in fact constitutional. Certainly this legal expert seemed to think that you could impeach ex-presidents last year.
We should impeach President Obama.
Maybe it was fake news, but the legal question is the least of the trial's problems. Chief Justice John Roberts has refused to preside over it because the Constitution only says he has to preside over trials of the current president. So instead, the senior-most Democrat Senator Pat Leahy will preside. And look, Leahy is very well respected, but he's a Democrat, so it does make the whole thing seem a bit like a stitch-up. Then there's the way Republicans have chosen to define the charges against Trump in the narrowest possible way.
This sham of an impeachment will ostensibly ask whether the president incited the reprehensible behavior and violence of January 6th, when he said, "I know everyone here will soon march to the Capitol to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard." Peacefully and patriotically, hardly words of violence.
Now, I'm pretty sure the impeachment's more about Trump's entire 2-month period of undermining elections than that particular sentence, or in fact, the speech it came from. But having said that, The Democrats themselves chose to focus on that speech in their article of impeachment. They wrote about Trump saying, "We won this election, and then we won it in a landslide," in that speech, and that also he willfully made statements in that speech that encouraged and foreseeably resulted in imminent lawless action at the Capitol. So let's see how that choice works out for them. Finally, Republicans are doing a lot of talking about the divisive nature of a trial, but I think Republican Senator Mitt Romney has the best response to that. He says, "Have you gone out publicly and said that there was not widespread voter fraud and that Joe Biden is the legitimate president? Because if you haven't said that, that's really what's at the source of the anger right now." Well said, Mitt. Anyway, the trial's facing a lot of issues. But even if the trial doesn't reach any great heights, at least, John, we're always going to have this moment.
Senators will have to decide if they believe Donald John Trump incited the insurrection against the United States.
I don't think he's ever incited the former.
Yeah, not guilty of that.
A number of you this week asked for a quick explanation about the filibuster. What is this thing we keep talking about? Well, in a nutshell, to end debate on any issue in the Senate and to bring it to a final vote, you first need to pass what's called a cloture motion. To do that, you need 60 of the 100 senators to agree. So, if 41 or more senators oppose cloture, you have a filibuster where any senator can just keep talking and talking to keep debate going indefinitely.
I rise today to begin to filibuster John Brennan's nomination for the CIA.
And as the hours pass, things can get a bit weird.
I do so like green eggs and ham. Thank you, Sam I am.
In theory, when one senator has read the collected works of Dr. Seuss and keels over, another senator against cloture can take over and then read the phone book. Most infamously, the filibuster was used to try and block civil rights legislation in the 1950s. Because of that Senate rule, in many cases, you don't just need a 51-vote majority to pass a bill, you now need 60 votes to first pass the cloture motion, and just the threat of a filibuster is usually enough to prevent a vote altogether. Who wants to hear Dr. Seuss? The ability to filibuster has been removed from executive branch appointments, though, like cabinet secretaries and federal judges, including the Supreme Court. And budget measures, which have an inbuilt time limit, don't need a cloture motion and can be passed through a process called reconciliation with a simple majority. The Senate can change the filibuster rule with a simple majority of its own, often called the nuclear option, but once you go nuclear, it's gone. And the majority party has a lot more power, and both sides know they will be the minority party at some stage, so they have been very wary till now. And if you have a question you'd like us to answer, you can always hit us up on Twitter on those addresses. Former President Obama is among those who are pushing for the filibuster to be tossed out. He, of course, faced unprecedented Senate obstruction during his presidency. President Biden, though, who was a senator himself for 36 years, has been a bit more on the fence, not ruling it out, but not jumping at the idea either. So what is the latest on the filibuster, Chaz?
Okay, well, at the start of every new session, the Senate passes a resolution that declares how the Senate's going to be run for the next 2 years, right? Now, Mitch McConnell thought that would be the perfect opportunity to refuse any organising agreement unless Democrats promised to not kill the filibuster during the next 2 years. And if they didn't agree, then the Senate would keep running like last session when Republicans were in charge of all the committees. Democrats didn't like that one much. In fact, one of them referred to it as an absolutely unprecedented, wacky, counterproductive request. Problem is, Mitch McConnell can filibuster the organising resolution unless the Democrats either gave in to his demands or chose to kill the filibuster right there and then on a technicality with their 50 votes. Except one of those votes, Joe Manchin, said, "I will not vote to bust the filibuster under any condition." And another of those votes, Kirsten Sinema, said she was against eliminating the filibuster and was not open to changing her mind about eliminating the filibuster. So you got a standoff. Thankfully, though, Mitch McConnell gave him the benefit of the doubt, and he said that since 2 Democratic senators had publicly confirmed they will not vote to end the filibuster, that was good enough for him, which was kind of unexpected from Mitch McConnell and very welcome, and therefore he's copying crap for it from all the other Republicans. But he did issue this warning, though, if the Democrats do break their word.
When Republicans next control the government, we'd be able to repeal every bill that had just been rammed through. And we'd set about defending the unborn, exploring domestic energy, unleashing free enterprise, defunding sanctuary cities, securing the border, protecting workers' paychecks from union bosses. You get the picture.
I do get the picture. If you mess with me, the abortion laws, the unions, the environment, cops in the neck. I don't think this is the last we're going to hear of this issue.
Mitch McConnell is a man of his words. He warned in 2013, when Democrats got rid of the filibuster from judicial appointments, that they would basically stack the court when they were in the majority, and they spent the last 4 years doing exactly that. So this is going to be an issue for a while. Now, in the wake of the Capitol Hill attack by pro-Trump rioters on January the 6th, this week, the US Department of Homeland Security warned domestic extremists pose a heightened threat environment across the United States, which DHS believes will persist in the weeks following the successful presidential inauguration. The bulletin said that potential American terrorists had, quote, grievances fueled by false narratives and were angry over COVID-19 restrictions, the 2020 election results, and police use of force. For more, we're joined by the former Assistant Secretary for Counterterrorism and Threat Prevention at the DHS, Elizabeth Newman. Welcome back to Planet America, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much for having me again.
So what did you make of this DHS bulletin this week, and how do you assess the current threat of pro-Trump far right-wing terrorist groups?
DHS has this statutory responsibility to warn the public of emerging threats, and it's not really a choice that they have. It's a responsibility to educate the public about any change in the threat environment. So with that perspective, they probably should have issued this bulletin at a minimum last November or December. Possibly there's an argument to be made that by the summer, enough had changed and we had this recognition of domestic extremist groups conducting acts of violence, and it really, the public should have been warned back then. It's very clear that the reason this bulletin did not come out at that time was because the White House wouldn't have wanted the political optics of the president's rhetoric encouraging this violence, the president's supporters conducting some of this violence. And so that is why DHS had not put it out previously. So what you see in like the first week of the Biden administration is, this is true in a number of topics, but a lot of just going back and fixing things and trying to reset and get the government back to where it needs to be. So that's what this bulletin is.
So you've said that this DHS warning was delayed as a result of political pressure that should have been issued before January 6th. If it had have been, would you go so far as to say it could have prevented the attack that we saw on the Capitol building?
We've only had 2 other bulletins like this in the last 10 years. So it's telling you something's changed, and it causes people to pause and say, hey, what's changed and what do I maybe need to do about that? How do I help my country and make sure that we all stay safe? So it does have a slight psychological effect, I think. And had it gone out before January 6th, I do think that law enforcement may have treated the intelligence that they had a little bit differently, because it would have sent a signal that, hey, we are seeing a major trend shift. We're seeing extremist groups not just talk about violence, but actually carry out acts of violence. And it may have helped people make better judgment calls. I mean, ultimately, the intel was there. This was the January 6th Capitol attack was clearly a lack of preparation on behalf of the Capitol Police and some of the other federal law enforcement agencies. I still don't understand why. I'm sure the investigation will start to answer some of that. But I think that if you had a bulletin out in advance, that it would have been more likely that Capitol Police and others would have taken the threat more seriously.
Are there any other sources of concern that you know of with respect to potential domestic terror?
Well, on the domestic terrorism front, there's a spectrum of different types of categories. We look at animal rights extremists as an example. They tend to target labs or property. They tend to not be lethal in their violence, and it doesn't in recent years hasn't been that prevalent. Another type of violence might be what we would consider it's a subcategory of anti-government extremism, but it tends to be on the left. Things like the Occupy Wall Street movement, or some of the protests and riots that have occurred in Portland or in Seattle come from this left extremism. But very often they are not necessarily instigating. They're not necessarily doing anything other than protesting, another group. And from a law enforcement perspective, what we see out of the left is not really a strong threat of lethal violence. Again, that's not to say they're not a problem for local law enforcement, but it doesn't necessarily rise to a national security concern. Whereas on the right, the types of violence that we see out of white supremacist groups, as well as anti-government extremists like militia, is much more significant. In the last 10 years, 76% of all hate-related murders have come from right-wing violent extremists.
Now, there seems to be one group of people out there who are quite keen to officially designate right-wing radical groups as domestic terrorism. And then there's another group that's worried about the ramifications for civil liberties if we do actually legally treat people in America the same as you treat foreign terror suspects. What's your view?
The fact of the matter is, you could conduct one act on behalf of ISIS, and that would allow the FBI to investigate you with more tools. That would allow the FBI to charge you with more severe penalties. You would be locked up for longer. You do the same act for, Adam Waffen division or neo-Nazis, and you get much lesser penalties. The FBI has a much more difficult time investigating you. Staying where we are today is not acceptable. The law treats Islamic terrorism much more severely than it treats domestic terrorism, and that in and of itself is wrong. If you're going to commit an act of violence, whether it's in the name of an Islamic religion or the name of your weird belief that whites are better than everybody else, both in my book are evil and perverse, and they should be treated based on the crime of terrorism, not necessarily where it originated in the globe.
And at this point, Elizabeth, how much of a factor do you think Donald Trump is? He's out of the White House, he's off most social media. Do things settle down now, or is the genie out of the bottle, do you think?
It is phenomenal how much the environment shifted when he was deplatformed from Twitter. If somebody had asked me if it would help, I would have said yes, but I don't think that any of us predicted how much it would help. I have a feeling that he will find a way to reconnect with his followers. He really enjoys the idolization that he gets from his supporters, and so I'm sure he will find ways to reconnect with them. But in the interim, it has had an effect of breaking some of the enchantment. You saw on January 20th when some of the QAnon conspiracies did not come through. You saw this meltdown online of people going, oh my gosh, we've been conned. And there was this sense that Trump had abandoned them, because in QAnon conspiracy theory, Trump was this messianic figure that was brought to the presidency to right all of these wrongs. And even though he had to wink and nod and not tell them how he was going to do it, he really, at the end of the day, was going to save everybody. So when that didn't happen, you saw the movement fracture. So there are some that still think that Trump is going to come back and save them, but there are a whole lot that realized this has all been a lie. And Trump conned us.
There seems to be a concern from law enforcement that if they overreach in response to radical groups, it might actually increase their support. Do you share that concern?
I do, and it's a really insightful question. If you look at the bulletin, one of the first things that jumped out at me is they didn't explicitly talk about white supremacy. They did not talk about the fact that this was largely coming from the right. Now, in the federal government here in the United States, the government avoids trying to talk about right versus left. It looks inherently partisan, so it's understandable why they might have tried to avoid that. But they could have said more based on the facts, even just the people being indicted alone, they could have given some of those statistics and given you a flavor of where these people are coming from ideologically, and they chose not to. And I hope that at some point in the future, maybe after they've finished the assessment that President Biden tasked the Director of National Intelligence to do, maybe that's when we get into more specifics, because I do think educating the public about the nature of the threat is really important. It helps inoculate people from recruitment, and it helps people level set on the nature of the threat, that it's not all Antifa, which half of the country thinks that's our biggest problem.
Elizabeth Newman, thanks for sharing your expertise once again.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, here's the deal.
Now, when Dustin Higgs became the 13th person to be executed by the federal government under Trump, it got a little bit of attention because it turns out that since the Trump administration rebooted federal executions in July last year, they went on quite a spree. 2020 was the first year ever that the federal government carried out more executions than all 50 states combined. And that's a big deal because most death penalty crimes are state matters. Hence, there have been less than 50 people on federal death row, but about 2,500 people on state death row. Yet, in 2020, the feds executed more people. If we look at the last 100 years or so, the numbers are even starker. Trump oversaw more federal executions in the last 6 months than the last 67 years of presidents combined. And just last year alone, more federal prisoners were executed than in any calendar year since 1896. And that is despite America as a whole losing interest in the death penalty over the last 40 years or so. These, by the way, are state and federal executions combined. Support for the death penalty has been falling for decades now, although it does still command majority approval for murder cases in America. Interestingly though, life imprisonment is now preferred over the death penalty for murder cases. So Americans are a little bit confused and on the fence there, but that's not why these executions under Trump were so controversial. The main reason is because a number of the cases were kind of marginal. Some of those executed prisoners were intellectually disabled. Some had serious mental illness. Some didn't kill anyone. Some were less culpable than accomplices who weren't executed. So why didn't they appeal the decisions? Well, they did. And the appeals weren't even finished. But the Supreme Court still gave the Department of Justice permission to just ignore the appeals and carry out the executions anyway. Sonia Sotomayor said that the court made these weighty decisions in response to emergency applications with little opportunity for proper briefing and consideration, often in just a few short days or even hours. Very few of these decisions offered any public explanation for their rationale. This is not justice, she said. Although, to be fair, Bill Barr has a pretty simple response to critics. He says, I think the way to stop the death penalty is to repeal the death penalty. But if you ask juries to impose it, and juries do impose it, then it should be carried out. Okay, but that brings us to Biden, who is apparently the first president ever to openly oppose the death penalty. So he might repeal it, even though he personally was responsible for a crime bill that added 60 crimes for which someone could be put to death. But anyway, let's leave that aside, whatever. If Biden wants to end the death penalty, fine, but he should maybe consider the real death penalty. According to that graph from before, Obama oversaw 0 executions, yeah? That's not true. According to Obama's own figures, he killed 3,797 people through drone strikes, including 324 civilians and at least 7 American citizens. Now, those are the official figures. The real figures could well be higher. In Trump's case, we know they're higher. Trump's Defense Department said that only 120 civilians were killed by US military operations in 2018, but independent trackers say it was more like 1,200, 10 times the official numbers. And as for the deaths from non-military drone strikes, like say the CIA, Trump stopped releasing those figures completely. So we literally have no idea right now how many people and how many American citizens are currently facing the instant death penalty without any trial or accountable process whatsoever. One American citizen who said he'd been targeted by drones 5 times sued the government to confirm that he was actually on the kill list and to challenge his position on that list. But this very week, his case was dismissed. You see, he couldn't prove that the missile strikes came from American drones or that he specifically was targeted by those drones. So he still doesn't know if his government is trying to kill him. You see, it's all very well to get outraged by Trump, but he's gone. And both of these methods of killing are now completely under Biden's power. No Congress required. So, what's he gonna do?
There were more reports this week that former President Donald Trump is entertaining the idea of creating a third party to be called the Patriot Party, rivaling both the Democrats and the Republicans that he once led. It may just be a ploy to keep Republicans loyal to him in this impeachment trial, but history suggests if he goes ahead with it, it could have a big impact. You've got to go way back to 1848 to find the last American president elected from a party other than the Republicans or the Democrats. That was Zachary Taylor, the 12th president. He was a member of the Whig Party, who, like their British counterparts, were named after the 17th century Scottish anti-royalist group known as the Whigamores. But you knew that. American Whigs took that name because they were against the presidents like Andrew Jackson behaving more like kings. It's now more than a century since a third-party candidate finished better than third place in a presidential election, and that was also the only time an ex-president ran under a new banner. In 1912, former President Theodore Roosevelt wanted to make a comeback after 4 years out of the White House. His old Republican Party, though, wasn't too keen, and they stood behind Roosevelt's successor, President William Howard Taft. Undeterred, Teddy formed the Progressive Party, dubbed the Bull Moose Party, advocating a strong federal government and policies including a national health care system.
Friends, our task as Americans is to strive for social and industrial justice achieved through the genuine rule of the people. This is our end, our purpose.
Roosevelt mostly drew Republican votes away from President Taft, though, finishing in second place and ensuring Democrat Woodrow Wilson won by more than 2 million votes, with socialist Gene Debs claiming 6% of the far-left vote. In 1948, it was the Democrats, though, who looked like being the ones to cannibalise their vote. It began with a convention walkout over President Harry Truman's civil rights program, including desegregation of the military.
The South's reply to this staggering blow, unprecedented in recent Democratic history, is an equally unprecedented move. The long-threatened walkout is led by Handy Ellis, Alabama chairman.
And we bid you goodbye.
After the majority of Democrats endorsed Truman's plan, segregationists created a rival states' rights or Dixiecrat party and nominated South Carolina Governor Strom Thurmond as their presidential candidate. But Harry Truman's headaches were just starting. The party's left wing also walked out over his hardening line against the Soviet Union. They formed a new Progressive Party and nominated former Democratic Vice President and socialist Henry Wallace for the presidency.
The platform calls for peace negotiations with Russia, an end to the Marshall Plan, nationalization of public utilities, and repeal of the Taft-Hartley Act.
With the three-way Democratic split, Republican Thomas Dewey looked like a shoo-in, but in the end, Truman sprang an upset as Dewey played it a little too safe, while Strom Thurmond won 4 states in the Deep South. Race was also the trigger for the next major Democratic split in 1968. Former Alabama Governor George Wallace, another segregationist Southern Democrat, ran against Democratic Vice President Hubert Humphrey and Republican Richard Nixon. Wallace courted white working-class voters concerned over things like too many civil rights, drug crime and all those hippies, who in turn thought he was a bit of a Nazi. Wallace, though, seemed to enjoy riling them up, even threatening to run them over.
Well, I want to tell you, if you'll elect me the president and I go to California, or I come to Arkansas and some of them lie down in front of my automobile, it'll be the last one they'll ever want to lie down in front of.
In In a close election, George Wallace won 5 southern states for a total of 46 electoral votes, but he probably didn't change the result. Pollsters found 80% of Wallace voters would otherwise have supported Richard Nixon. In 1980, Republican Congressman John Anderson broke with the increasingly conservative party to stand as a libertarian independent against Ronald Reagan, the Republican, and Democratic President Jimmy Carter. Anderson reached 25% in some opinion polls, but on election day attracted less than 7% of the vote. Independent businessman Ross Perot's 19% share of the vote in 1992 was the highest third-party vote since Teddy Roosevelt's 80 years earlier, but he failed to win any states or electoral votes. Experts suggest, like John Anderson, Ross Perot drew votes pretty equally from both sides. So, history shows a former president with a strong personal following like Teddy Roosevelt can have a major impact. So it is conceivable that Donald Trump running for a Patriot Party could draw significant support, particularly amongst white Southern Republican voters, and defeat the Republican candidate, but probably not the Democrats. Any other Patriot candidate, though, could struggle, even if they were a member of Congress or a governor or former VP. So perhaps the only reason for Trump to do it would be revenge, although that could be reason enough. But there might be a hitch. Newsweek reports this week the name Patriot Party has already been registered as a trademark by a Florida resident named Donald, but not Donald Trump. It's someone called Donald Magyar. Close to MAGA, but maybe not close enough. Whoa, time now for a fireside chat. And this week, President Biden was wielding the presidential pen, signing off on more of these executive orders on climate change, criminal justice reform, transgender rights, a whole host of things, drawing, of course, howls of protest from Republicans that this is, presidential overreach. He should be going through Congress. He talks about unity. What is he doing? All this kind of thing. I mean, there's a lot in these executive orders, and there have been a lot of them.
They really have. After 1 week, Biden had signed 32 executive orders. Okay, we said last week, all the presidents do executive orders. Yeah, but Trump had only signed 4 in the first week. Obama had only signed 5. W had signed 0, and Clinton had signed 1. So this is a lot of executive orders, John.
It's certainly, he's, as everyone is saying, he's getting straight to work, he's hitting the ground running. One thing to note, though, in fact, executive orders, we have this perception that, with partisanship and so on being what it is, and this is the other side of the filibuster coin, of course. When you've got partisan gridlock, no compromise, the Congress stops functioning, therefore the president has to use whatever powers are at their disposal to try and get things done. It really ramped up during that partisan era under Bill Clinton, the Gingrich Revolution of 1994. Bill Clinton had about 360 executive orders during his 8 years in office. George W. Bush was a little bit less than that. Barack Obama was a little bit less than that. Trump was a little bit less than that, but it was still well over 200 executive orders. So as much as anything else, when we don't know where Biden's going to finish on all of this, is this what every week is going to look like? Or is this just, we're going to tick a bunch of things off so we're seen to be doing things in a big hurry? But you know what? We're actually focusing in a legislative sense on COVID, economy, because that's all that matters right now.
Yeah, I think it's probably fair to say this may well be just a reflection of how organised his staff are. We keep on talking about how competent his staff are. Right. Had everything lined up before he turned up, so he could then just go bang, 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 bang as soon as he got there. Having said that, that's fine, but I'm sure I remember a candidate about 3 months ago. Don't remember the name.
Some candidate?
Slipped my mind who it was exactly, but someone wasn't a big fan of executive orders.
I have this strange notion. We are a democracy. Some of my Republican friends and some of my Democratic friends even occasionally say, well, if you can't get the votes by executive order, you're going to do something. Things you can't do by executive order unless you're a dictator. We're a democracy. We need consensus.
Call it Guinness Book of Records. Hypocritical politician. Who would have thought?
But I guess that does speak to Joe Biden's instinct, which is, after 3.5 decades a senator, he believes in the process of legislation and the Senate's role, which is that of the cooling saucer, the compromise that actually gets things done. And unfortunately, we've seen in really the last 15 years, the Senate has become a place of obstruction rather than compromise.
Sure. The fact remains, though, regardless of whether he's a hypocrite or not, with the executive orders now, they're popular. If you look at the polls, ABC Ipsos polled last week, 69% approved of Biden's COVID response with the executive orders. 81% supported the federal mandate for requiring mask
surprising.
wearing. Yeah, 81%. 70% supported rejoining WHO. 65% supported rejoining the Paris Climate Pact. 55% supported reversing the Muslim travel ban. 77% supported government-wide focus on racial equity. 56% support reversing the Trump policy on excluding non-citizens in the census. And 65% supported restaying DACA. They're good numbers.
They certainly are. And Biden himself is getting approval ratings around the 60% mark at the moment for his handling of the transition.
The 538 average is 53% approval. So
yeah,
that's
right.
awesome.
Which I guess, you know, still says pretty evenly divided country, but given that President Trump never got above 50% approval in the average of approval polls for his entire presidency, this is, well, America's still not united, but slightly less disunited than they were for a very long time.
At least so far. The question for Republicans, of course, is how you combat this. And what they're choosing to do, which it's not a bad idea, is to attack the environmental executive actions as saying that they are job killers.
Yeah.
Right now, we heard about the pipeline, the Keystone XL pipeline, which Biden has closed down. That's 11,000 construction jobs gone. Apart from that, you're talking about the fracking a lot, which is that was no new leases on federal land, which sounds...
Which is a caveat on a caveat on a caveat, really.
Exactly. When you actually look into it, you go, well, federal land, that's like 9% of the onshore areas for drilling in federal land.
Yeah, and so it's not for coal, it's just for oil and gas.
That's right.
And it's only new leases. And
only new leases.
There are a lot of leases out there already. Pretty much anything that has oil or gas on it has got leases on it.
Yeah.
And a lot of these, they're not even being exploited. They've got literally decades worth of digging and fracking and drilling to do if they want, if that is the future. And, you know, we don't really know. But certainly we've got not just the Biden administration this week, but also private companies like General Motors essentially saying, don't worry, in a decade from now, it's going to be all electric, baby. Forget about burning stuff.
Yeah, nevertheless, John Kerry, who's the climate change czar, is taking a lot of questions about this particular issue, not dealing with it the best.
Coal plants have been closing over the last 20 years. So what President Biden wants to do is make sure those folks have better choices, that they have alternatives, that they can be the people who go to work to make the solar panels. They were making them here at home.
You can see where he's going. He's trying, he's kind of saying the right things, but he's just not very good at this. I
don't know about banning fracking. They should be banning hair dye. He looks incredible.
That's where the black gold goes into his hair. That'll keep the industry going.
Yeah.
I can see where he's going. I don't think they're going to hit black gold, the Republicans, with this, because Kerry might not be very good at this, but Biden is. He's very good at seeming sympathetic. Every time he opens his mouth, and when he talks about environment, he's talking about jobs all the time. Jobs. And it's like Andrew Yang said during the Democrat conference last year. Remember, he said, whenever Biden supports a policy, even if it's a radical policy, it seems moderate.
Right.
He defines what is moderate, and the polls don't lie.
Well, also this week, a test for the enduring power of Donald Trump in the Republican Party. His former press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, has announced she's running for governor of the state of Arkansas with Trump's blessing, although maybe it could turn out to be a curse. She says she'll be running to replace the term-limited Republican governor, Asa Hutchinson. Here's her pitch to voters.
Today, I announce my candidacy for governor of Arkansas and ask for your prayers and your support. As governor, I will defend your right to be free of socialism and tyranny, your Second Amendment right to keep your family safe, and your freedom of speech and religious liberty.
Now, a few things to say about that, Jess. First, in her announcement video, at least, we don't know what the campaign's going to look like. This is for the 2022 election cycle, so the primary is going to be happening next year. Yep. But she's talking about Washington. She's talking about the socialists taking over, and we now need a governor in Little Rock who is going to be a bulwark against the communists, basically. Running that kind of a national sort of ideological campaign at a state level is not that common in the United States. Usually in a place like Arkansas, you're talking about schools, you're talking about health, you're talking about the pandemic, you're talking about bridges and roads and all that kind of stuff. But as for her chances and what this says about Trump, I mean, how big a litmus test is this going to be? Because we're going to see a lot of very Trumpy candidates at least trying to get into those primaries next year.
Well, first of all, thank God for Sarah Huckabee Sanders. She's the only thing standing between Arkansas and socialism.
Yeah.
She's the only thing.
The People's Republic of Arkansas.
But look, to be honest, I think she's a bit of a shoo-in. I don't think she's much of a litmus test because she's got such high name recognition. It's almost the Trumpiest state in the union. Like
and name recognition not just because she was on the podium in the White House, but because her dad, Mike Huckabee, was a two-term governor of Arkansas himself in the 90s and early 2000s.
Totally. I don't know what Trump's approval is in Arkansas. I'm guessing it's in the 80s.
Yeah.
It'd be pretty high. So it'd be pretty hard for her not to win. I reckon if we're looking for litmus tests, I think the real litmus test is going to be what's happening to Liz Cheney.
Yeah.
Because certain Republicans have her in the gun after she voted to impeach Trump. Other Republicans in the leadership are trying to protect her.
Right.
But the question is just how popular is Donald Trump these days? Can he get the goons to do what he wants? Because I'm sure he wants her gone.
You can use Matt Gaetz's name. That's okay. He was in Wyoming today rallying against Liz Cheney.
After his leader,
Yeah.
Kevin McCarthy, specifically told him to stop naming people when he attacks them because of death threats.
Yeah.
And he just went and held a rally against her.
Now, we're talking about bipartisanship at the moment. There is actually cross-partisan support for Joe Biden's plan to get American schools open within the first 100 days for in-person tuition. A lot of concern that even though the pandemic continues to rage, that particularly young disadvantaged children of colour, are falling way behind some of the ritzier schools that in some cases never even closed. They didn't have to. And this has become a fascinating issue. The teachers' union, hugely influential in democratic politics, they're saying it's still too risky for us, for the teachers and for their families. They could be bringing the disease home. But a lot of parents are saying we need the kids back in school. Politicians are saying we need them back in school. Where's this headed, do you think?
Look, there is certainly real issues with this whole topic because depression, like youth depression and youth suicide has increased a lot. People are tying it to this whole epidemic and staying home from school. As you say, huge gaps in achievement between rich kids and poor kids, and the thing is that I think everyone understands why teachers would be hesitant to go back, but some of these teachers unions have some interesting demands where they're saying even after all the teachers are vaccinated, we still don't want to go back. Some are saying 2022 they will go back, and obviously that affects whether people can work as well. On top of that, CDC have put out study after study saying when you look at the private schools and you look at the schools that are open, they're not spreading. It is actually an incredibly safe place to be at a school.
And they've spent tens of billions of dollars on trying to make these places safe as well, with grids in the classroom, chairs and tables socially distanced, mask wearing, washing basins by the door of every classroom, hand sanitizer. They've invested the kind of money that teachers have been begging to pay for books and pencils for decades, and this has all been funneled in, but the classrooms are still empty.
We should say, strictly speaking, this is not Joe Biden's responsibility. He's not in charge of public school teachers. But having said that, when they ask him about it, he's really on the fence. He does not want to alienate those teachers' unions. And I think people can smell that.
Yep.
And so you've got a situation at the moment in Chicago where the school board has told them, you're supposed to go back now, told the teachers. And the teachers are saying, no, we're not going back. They've only missed a preparatory week so far, so it doesn't really matter. The kids are supposed to go back to school next week. So this issue could really elevate in next week and in the weeks after if Joe Biden doesn't work out a way to at least square the circle.
And if the teacher's not standing at the front of the classroom, then the schools don't open again. There's no point. And it's already happened twice in the last 6 months that the teachers basically didn't turn up for school. But now it's time for a whole new segment.
That's a bunch of malarkey.
Yes, welcome to the No Malarkey Zone, where we're going to do some debunking, some fact-checking, and generally try and spot the shenanigans on both sides. And first this week, Chaz, to the flap over Joe Biden's watch. It all began with a New York Times report, which noted that Biden was wearing a Rolex Date Just watch when he placed his hand on the Bible to take that solemn oath last week. The article noted that the watch is worth around $7,000, and they compared that unfavourably to Bill Clinton's presidential timepiece, an inexpensive Timex Iron Man they described as a plastic digital watch, and George W. Bush's Timex Indiglo, which was a watch that just cost $50 from the local pharmacy. Cue the cries of Democrat hypocrisies, a rich man in poor clothing. But then this photo emerged of Joe Biden's son, Beau, who of course died of brain cancer in 2015. They looked at the watch. Suddenly, social media was alight with people like political commentator Anna Navarro chiding the New York Times with, "The watch that Biden wore at the swearing-in belonged to Beau Biden. It was in honour of his dead son." You bastards! So then social media was full of calls for everyone to cancel their subscription to the New York Times, until the website Mediaite, to their credit, phoned the White House, asked them about the watch. The White House confirmed it wasn't actually Beau Biden's watch. They said the Rolex was, in fact, a Christmas gift from the First Lady. This official didn't know whether Beau's ownership of a similar watch was a factor in the selection of that for a gift. So we're left with the question, I guess, as does it matter if Joe Biden is wearing a $7,000 watch in the first place? Donald Trump had watches that were valued around $50,000. Melania Trump had a handbag worth about $90,000 when she left the White House the other day. So should people care? Is this just kind of virtue signalling? George W. Bush was the son of a president. He was a former governor, oil money up the wazoo, and he's wearing a $50 watch just because he looks like a man of the people?
I don't know why anyone has a watch in 2021, to be honest. Although, having said that, I can understand why a newspaper called The Times would care about watches. Look, I'm just relieved that we're back. This is like a nostalgia trip, back to stupid news stories, like 20 years ago when they talked about Al Gore inventing the internet and stuff.
Yeah.
Like
Barack Obama's tan suit.
Yeah,
biggest scandal.
We're back to that stuff. I'm just happy that we're back to trivialities rather than my opposition is evil and a socialist and Hugo Chavez's ghost.
Yeah, that's true. I should note as well, possibly the significance for Jill Biden was that particular watch is known as the President because the Rolex company gave a free one to Dwight Eisenhower in 1952 before he became president. So it's become the presidential watch. We don't know if that's a freebie or not.
The important thing, John, is that Twitter's found something to be angry about. That's the important thing.
That is good.
Look, there's been no shortage of malarkey in the COVID space this week. For example, when Joe Biden said this,
if we fail to act, there will be a wave of evictions and foreclosures in the coming months as this pandemic rages on, because there's nothing we can do to change the trajectory of the pandemic in the next several months.
People flipped out. They pointed to the final debate last year when Biden said,
what I would say is I'm going to shut down the virus, not the country.
And people say, gotcha! But the thing is, it actually kind of makes sense. The victims of COVID now are going to be baked in the statistics for the next 2 months. You can't affect them. You can only affect the ones who come after them. So I don't think those are contradictions at all.
Yeah.
This is how Biden put it.
Well, I'm going to shut down the virus, but I never said I'd do it in 2 months. I said it took a long time to get here. It's going to take a long time to beat it.
Mind you, Biden's got a bit of his own malarkey. We talked last week about his malarkey where he was saying, the Trump administration had done nothing about vaccines. We were starting from scratch and we're going to somehow find a million doses a day. And at the end of Biden's first week, they'd already been a total of 47 million doses distributed, 24 million administered, and a 7-day average for that 7 days of 1.2 million doses every day over their target. And when it was pointed out to Biden that his target was malarkey, he said,
when I announced it, you all said it's not possible. Come on, give me a break, man.
Now, that was a very Trumpy kind of answer. Nobody said it was possible, and we did it.
And that was complete malarkey. Everyone said it was possible, and there was a very conservative
It was
target.
happening.
So anyway, when the Biden administration did another little lap of honour this week, there was more malarkey. They were saying, we've found a way to secure vaccine supply adequate to provide a dose for every adult by summer. What they didn't mention, though, was that when they'd found a way to secure the extra doses, it was through the contract signed by the Trump administration, which gave the government options to continue increasing the doses they could receive. So there's a bit of pattern developing here where they take credit for the previous administration's handiwork, which, to be fair, is not unlike what Trump did with the Obama economy.
It's the old story, isn't it? It's like everything bad is their fault, everything good we're going to take credit for, and they get away with it. It's
malarkey.
It is malarkey. That's all for this week. We'll see you at the same time next Friday night. We're also on iView anytime that suits you.
Don't forget the PEP podcast. We're going to be going into a lot more detail about Trump's impeachment. But before we go, we did speak about the standoff with Chicago's teachers.
Yes.
For those struggling to understand their position on safety from COVID, they decided to explain it for you using the language of dance.
Bye-bye.
Safety is essential. Keep our students and our teachers safe. It's our livelihood versus our lives.